Now, I'm standing because what we need is leadership.
We're currently in opposition, but we don't exist to be in opposition.
We have to get this right. We have to renew.
Work with me in this new Conservative Party, and together, let's take a stand for the country that we love. Thank you.
In less than a month, one of these four will win the race to lead the Conservative Party and become the official leader of the opposition. They have all been making their pitch at the party conference in Birmingham. Westminster Watch was there to speak exclusively to two of them.
If you're successful in your bid for Conservative leadership, how do you plan to become Prime Minister?
By demonstrating to the British people that the Conservative Party has the answers for the challenges they face, helping younger people get on the housing ladder, boosting the economy, making sure there's economic growth, but also doing so in a positive, energetic, upbeat manner. I think if we do that, if we provide answers in a positive spirit, that will be rewarded at the ballot box and we'll get back into government.
How will you unite an increasingly divided party and win back the voters you lost to Lib Dems and Reform UK?
Well, you're absolutely right to ask, because the truth is we need to unite the party, but not just the party. We need to unite the country. Look at what the last 12 weeks of Labour have done. They've divided old people from young. They've taken money off the pensioners who are vulnerable and given it to their union paymasters. They've chosen to side with their own electorate and made everybody else punished. Now that isn't the way you unite a country, and they've also damaged the economy. In the last 3 months, they've scared people off investing, scared people off doing anything other than saving their money, and guess what? We're all going to feel the pain when the budget comes, because Rachel's after your cash.
The conference was not so much an exchange of ideas, so much as a beauty contest for the contenders. While the current leader, Rishi Sunak, did make a speech, most eyes were on the four vying to replace him.
For us, it led to a reckoning, a historic defeat worse than 1997, a defeat that could extinguish the Conservative Party. We have to get this right. We have to renew, and then we can regain the trust of the British people.
If I am your leader, the pressure group for Britain's hard-working majority will be us, the Conservative Party.
Penny Mordaunt is someone many members would have liked to have in this contest. The former leader of the House lost her seat in the last election, but she still plans to be a big part of the future of the Conservative Party, whoever wins this race.
What's most important now is character and reach and rapport with the British public. We have to show them that we are back in the service of them and that they are our only care. And so when people have been asking my advice about who they should vote for, I say to them, you should vote for the person that makes you proudest.
Soon the MPs will whittle the four down to two, and it'll be over to the members to make the final decision. Our producers decided to take the temperature among party members at conference.
She's forthright, she's open, she's honest, and she's got the tenacity to actually make a difference.
Tom Tuggenhat.
Why is that?
I think he's probably the best candidate to move the Conservative Party away from the kinds of culture war talking points that they've been having for the last few years.
I think Tom is one of the candidates that I think can bring both the Lib Dem voters that went at the general election and those from Reform, can bridge the gap. And I think, he's got the experience. He hasn't got a lot of the heavy baggage that the other candidates have got. He's got experience in the military, and I think he'll be the best leader to not only be the new party leader, but the next Prime Minister as well.
It's James Cleverly, because we have to look at how we didn't look serious as a government in the last few years. We were just infighting all the time. It was practically like the government was being run on Twitter rather than actually being run at Westminster. And what James offers is the only guy that can unite the party, and he does just seem like a credible person you can actually see on the steps of Downing Street in 5 years.
I'll choose Kimi because I'm a bit of a right-winger, but Tom, I think, is better for the country.
Why is he better for the country?
He's old school, one nation, middle ground. I think a sensible person that people can relate to.
I would like to support James Cleverly because he's a very good leader, and I have met him personally, and I like the attitude and how he respects everybody, including women's, and I've seen, I'm a hospital consultant, I'm an NHS staff, so he has respected quite a lot to the how to reform the NHS. So he owns my vote.
Back in the studio, I'm joined by the former political editor of the Daily Mirror, Nigel Nelson, and political journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Butterworth. Welcome to you both. Now, as you will have seen, we had an exclusive with James Cleverly, one of the contenders for the leadership, and Tom Tugendhat, another contender for the leadership. Benjamin, let me ask you this. We asked James and Tom separately, you know, if they win the leadership, how will they become Prime Minister? James Cleverly's answer was quite interesting, but I want to know if it's enough. He basically said, as a Conservative Party, yes, we've got to focus on growth, but we also have to look, and I'm paraphrasing, at some of the intergenerational issues. And he pointed to young people, he pointed to housing as one of the big problems that he feels the Conservatives can fix. Is that enough, do you think, to propel them?
Well, I think that's a deeply rational way to look at the problem they have, which almost certainly means that he won't win, based on Tory leadership elections in recent years. I think the problem that they're struggling to get to grips with is that for quite a number of elections, the Tories have won based on the boomer vote, based on Daily Mail, Daily Express readers, those people that are pensionable age. And the simple maths of that no longer adds up like it used to. Millennials were a bigger voting bloc at this election than the boomers were, and that's only going to be more the case in 5 years. And I think if you look at voting patterns, the idea that people get more conservative with age has been broken. Now it's overwhelmingly Labour voters for anybody under 40, and you have to get to 66.
Is it, Benjamin? Is it overwhelmingly Labour? Because remember, Labour only won this election with something like 35.7% share of the vote. That's not overwhelming anything.
But it is for the generation under 40, and you have to go to 65 and over before you get the Tories winning. So they have massive generational problems. Their voters are simply dying off. And so if they want to keep going on about culture war issues, which definitely drives some voters, but it also puts off a lot of others, young, aspirational, mildly affluent in the South, they're the voters they're losing to the Lib Dems. I think they're going to hit a brick wall, a red wall, you might say, that stops them from
James
going
Cleverly, Nigel, he's not aiming directly for the reform voter, the ex-Conservative who's gone to reform that really Benjamin's alluding to there. And Tom Tugendhat, he's another one in the centre ground. He basically, his pitch to us though was that essentially he's going to get the Conservatives back onto the centre ground of politics. Easy to say. Can he do it, do you think?
Well, the centre ground is where elections are won. So if the Conservatives make a mistake by lurching to the right, the chance of winning the next election is pretty unlikely. The same thing happened in 1997 when Tony Blair won his landslide for Labour. What you saw there was the Conservatives spent a lot of time trying to work out exactly what they were and who they stood for. And it wasn't until David Cameron came along and won in 2010 that they moved on to Labour's ground. So you've just had a left of centre party winning the general election. On that basis, you've got to think, well, hang on, is lurching to the right way to go? Now, what is interesting about this is both James Cleverly and Tom Tugendhat, who are meant to be centrists, they are both pandering to the right wing anyway, looking at the Conservative Party membership. So what has played a huge part in this leadership election is immigration. And James Cleverly talks, for instance, about bringing back the Rwanda scheme to remove cross-channel migrants to Central Africa. That's just complete madness. I mean, looking at...
But it's something he kind of described as bonkers anyway in the first place.
Initially he did, and then he became Home Secretary and suddenly was in love with the policy. But there's that. And then you've got Tom Tugendhat, who talks about leaving the European Court of Human Rights over immigration and also putting a cap of around about 100,000 on immigrants who can come into the UK. Now, caps haven't worked before, and the reason they don't work is you take the number of immigrants you need depending on what the requirements of the economy are. So all these things pander to the right. I doubt they'd ever become policy as such.
We're talking about pandering to the right on immigration. Benjamin, do your instincts tell you, though, that immigration is not just a right issue anymore. Labour are kind of very wary on immigration themselves, aren't they?
Yeah, and if you look to Europe, there's lots of evidence that immigration is a centre ground issue. The difference and the
let me ask you this: will it be the issue at the next election, do you think?
I think that immigration numbers are likely to fall for various reasons. Lots of the people that have come over in recent years have been on the Ukraine scheme, have been coming on from Afghanistan, and those things may naturally not be as significant in 5 years. So there's a bit of help for the Labour government on that. But the question about immigration is definitely a big one. The problem is that the Tories have spent the last couple of years going, oh, we must stop the boats, we must reduce immigration. All they did was draw attention to the problem. And if you have voters for whom their main concern is immigration, well, they're going to go for the party that's really tough on immigration, and that's Reform. And James Cleverly was the person who said this the other day. He said saying the phrase stop the boats was a mistake, because they didn't stop the boats, they're never going to stop the boats, and if you really hate the boats, then you're going to vote for the other guys on the further right. And so I think the problem they have is that they are thinking more about those Reform voters. Many of the members could be, Reform voters. They're that kind of politics, and that ain't winning an election.
Nigel, I mean, it's a fair point. At the moment, let's remember in this election for the next leader of the Conservative Party, the next round is the MPs. It's not actually the members. And yet we are hearing pitches from all four candidates that are being made to the members. The idea of appealing to a more right-wing audience, which is broadly the Conservative base. Let me put it to you. Do you think that the system of how the Conservatives elect a leader of the opposition is actually going to lead to inevitable letdown, because they'll row back the minute that they've been elected by their members and drop positions and policies that they've indicated, just like Starmer did with the Labour Party?
Yeah, I think that's highly likely. I'm not sure it's a very clever idea to put it to the membership anyway. The Conservative Party membership, is very small. You're talking about 114,000 people. They don't represent the wider electorate because they're 96% white. 2/3 of them are men and 7 in 10 are over 50. So on the basis of that any Conservative leader who aspires to be Prime Minister will be looking to ditch some of the things that he wooed the membership with.
And that can lead to all sorts of problems, Benjamin, as we've seen with the Labour Party. But let's not talk about them. Let's talk now about those candidates who are appealing to the right, much more than James Cleverly or Tom Tugendhat. And I'm thinking of Kemi Badenoch and I'm thinking of Robert Jenrick. Kemi Badenoch went in as favourite before this conference. She was a clear lead amongst the members. Do you think she still is the favourite after talking loosely about maternity pay amongst other issues?
Well, this is the thing, because it's MPs who will decide the final two, and they are more moderate than Conservative Party members at large. It's quite hard to predict, I think, and there's only, 120 odd of them, so there's going to be a couple of votes between each candidate. So I'm not sure who the final two will be, but I think if Kemi Badenoch is in, my money would be on her winning. What I wonder, though, is that after her gaffes in recent days, whether it's seeming to say 10% of civil servants should be in prison or that maternity pay had gone too far, was excessive, I think was her word, is that will Tory MPs look at that and think, am I going to spend every day going around these studios trying to explain what my leader has said? Because if there's anything they're sick of after the last couple of years, it's trying to explain stupid comments. So you'd think a Tory MPs thinking we don't want another Liz Truss, because I think that's what Kemi Badenoch would be.
She's authentic though, isn't she, Nigel? Don't people crave authenticity in their politicians? She kind of says it as it is and what she believes.
Yes, I get that bit, but as Benjamin said, that along the way there are just too many gaffes. And there are things that she does and says, aside from the two that Benjamin mentioned there, that I think have actually lost her votes amongst the MPs. One of them would have been the fact she didn't even start campaigning until quite late because she wanted to take a summer holiday. Everyone should have a holiday, not against that, but if you're standing for the leadership and that is the campaign window you've got, get out there and do it. That's what Robert Jenrick did all the way through, and that's why he caught up with her pretty quickly. Other sort of things of saying, like, I'm working class because I did a few shifts in McDonald's when I was 16. It was just a silly thing to say. And so that's the kind of thing that I think Benjamin's right there. Tory MPs don't want to go around the place having to try and explain some gaffe that she makes in the future when she's their leader.
One thing we do know about MPs is that they are concerned about immigration, and not just Conservative MPs, but we're talking about Conservative MPs. Robert Jenrick, who's after the same votes of MPs that Kemi Badenoch is trying to get hold of, he's also committed to net zero, with quite a few caveats, but net zero, an increase in defence spending and tougher rules on immigration. That may be a route to becoming leader of the party. Do you think that's also a route to power?
I think it's actually quite hard to predict how they win the next election because, as Theresa May pointed out in a column she wrote for The Times at the weekend, they're spending a lot of time thinking about those issues you just named, but actually they lost, almost 70 MPs from Tories went to the Liberal Democrats, a much bigger portion than they lost seats to Reform. And so I think that may well not be the concern, because green issues are massive for those kind of southern people that went to the Lib Dems. And I think Robert Jenrick is in danger of being out of touch. I think the odds of this person, whoever it is, becoming the next Prime Minister are pretty slim at best, but they could set the groundwork for a subsequent leader.
Who should Labour fear most, Nigel?
I think that that Keir Starmer would have his biggest problem with Tom Tugendhat.
Why?
Because Tom would actually be on his ground. So that's why I think, going back to the analogy of Tony Blair and David Cameron posed the greatest threat to New Labour leading up to 2010 because he suddenly adopted their ground. It was compassionate conservatism. It was a complete change from what the Tory party had been in the past. And that's where the current Conservative Party needs to sort itself out. It's got to decide, while in opposition, it was trying to do it in government, which was ridiculous, but while in opposition, it must decide what it wants to be, what this party stands for, whether it's a right-wing party veering on Reform UK, whether it's more a moderate party veering towards the current Labour Party. But what they must do is work out where they are. And if they can move on to Labour's ground, that would then give Keir Starmer a real problem, because what you'll be challenging him on is not on the ideology, but on the competence.
Who do you think Labour should fear most, Benjamin?
I think it would be Tom Tugendhat or James Cleverly, although I think James Cleverly has a tendency not to make much impact.
Isn't his problem? He's been Home Secretary,
Yeah.
He's been Foreign Secretary, he's been as close to Boris as to Rishi Sunak as anyone else. Don't Labour just say, well, look at you. You were the senior player in the last horrendous decade of Conservative government.
The thing is, I think James Cleverly passes the pint test. He seems like quite a normal, quite an amusing person. He often has a sense of humour, which is rare among senior politicians. And so I think...
And dangerous.
Indeed, yeah. But I think maybe slightly in a way like Wes Streeting, he's quite appealing, he's quite friendly. He doesn't have the grandiose sense about himself on television that most politicians do. I think Tom Tugendhat would be very difficult because as a former soldier, he comes with gravitas, he comes with dignity, he comes with respect. And I think he's also very moderate and has a southern seat. And so those people that went over to the Lib Dems may well feel comfortable with him. Meanwhile, that army background could give him some kudos with those people that went to Reform. So I think he'd have a plausible chance. However, I don't think he'd win with the members in a million years.
But Benjamin touched on Theresa May, and I just want to read back a quote that she wrote only a few days ago about the fight for the next leader of the Conservative Party. And she wrote this: "We lost because we were seen to have abandoned the two key Conservative attributes of integrity and competence, particularly economic competence." Is she right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that things really went downhill as soon as Boris Johnson was voted in as Tory leader and Prime Minister. It then became a complete disaster under Liz Truss, who followed him, and that was about economic competence. So she came up with a budget that crashed the markets. People don't forget that sort of thing easily. So the whole point about competence, had Rishi Sunak been there, that wouldn't have happened. I think if Rishi Sunak had been elected leader when he stood against Liz Truss, the chances are the Tories would still have lost the election, but not by as many as they did this time round.
We saw on the fringes, and you brought this up, not me, we saw on the fringes of the conference Liz Truss. We briefly saw former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. And of course, the looming presence of Boris Johnson was there with his serialisation of his book. Should the new leader, and how much difference would this make? Should the new leader make an absolute clean break with the past, decisively, if you like, rejecting those policies that are now presented by Conservatives as having talked right and acted left?
Well, the electorate has completely rejected them. There's never been a bigger rejection than the one they got a few months ago. And yet, if you listen to them in the last few months, they don't seem to understand that. So it would be sensible to do that. I actually think if Rishi Sunak had mimicked what Keir Starmer did, and he had thrown Liz Truss out of the parliamentary party, then he would have stood a better chance. Because I don't think they understand, and you saw this, when Liz Truss was giving a talk at the conference, absolutely packed out. They were
not
loving
many
it.
MPs there,
No.
just members of the public,
But
and,
you
and
saw
that's a difference.
Conservative members.
Yes, Conservative
members.
Sorry, yes.
The Vox Pops, as they walked out saying, oh, we need someone like her, she was the best leader we've had. They are completely deluded. And if the next Tory party leader doesn't take on its own base and get rid of those ideas and the association with what went on, then they are doomed for a decade.
How do you disassociate yourselves if, as is the case with every single candidate for leader, they've all served in the governments of either Boris Johnson or Rishi Sunak? How do you do it?
Well, I mean, it's the way Keir Starmer did it. He had the same problem. He served in the shadow cabinet of Jeremy Corbyn when the Labour Party was extreme left, certainly far left, under Jeremy Corbyn. He's distanced himself totally, as Benjamin pointed out. He chucked Jeremy Corbyn out of the party to actually make the point. I think unfairly, but there you go. That he did that to make a break with the past. All future leaders should make a break with the past. So it's what Tony Blair did.
But let me pick you up on that. Sorry to interrupt you there, Nigel. Starmer was elected, remember, leader of the Labour Party, which was on basically a mandate to effectively continue Corbynism. I mean, that's how it stood. And then he pivoted hard to the centre and won the massive majority. So is your advice to disassociate yourself only after you've become leader, woo people before by admiring Liz Truss and others, maybe not so well, but clearly a lot of members did. Is your advice then, look, ignore what they're saying now, these leaders, they're just going to pivot like Starmer
That's
did.
politics, and that's what they do.
It's deceitful though, isn't it?
Oh yeah, but politics is. I mean, I think that we have to actually accept that that's the way politicians run it. And you do get these breaks with the past. That, I mean, Tony Blair rose through the ranks of old Labour before creating new Labour. David Cameron got a new kind of Conservative party. The same thing must happen now, that whoever comes out as leader must create a new party and abandon the past. Also, bear in mind, he probably won't be Prime Minister because there's bound to be at least one other leadership election, possibly two, before the general election.
Why would we face another a leadership election before? Why does the leader have to go, do you think?
It's what the Conservative Party does. I mean, if you think about the fact that we've had, 4 Prime Ministers in 5 years, during the long New Labour years, the 13 years New Labour was in, you kept changing your leader then. You had a very good one to start with, which was William Hague.
All right, but Benjamin, maybe the Conservatives' future is in the hands of Labour, who are really tanking at the moment. I think Starmer's more unpopular now, quicker than any previous Prime Minister. They are tripping up over themselves with stupid mistakes. Are Labour going to be the secret key to number 10 for the Conservatives?
I think, well, you've just seen a parliament where the Tories were the secret key to Labour's success, but I don't think it's going to be repeated. What you've got right now is exactly what you described. Stupid mistakes, failing to handle a crisis that shouldn't have become a crisis, and a lack of policy announcements that could have filled the void that was causing the problem. But I think the difference is, the reason that Labour is so unpopular is because it basically has no choice but to do deeply unpopular things, to not hand out sweets to people, to have to do cuts that nobody wants, including on its own side. And that is because in 5 years, this may have paid off significantly. And I think that's the real danger. If what Labour's reaping now, they sow in a few years, then people are not going to have forgotten the chaos and the relative poverty that they felt at the end of the Tory government.
Nigel, have the public got very short memories?
Oh, they always have, yes. I think that the current crises that we're seeing...
But that will help the Conservatives, won't it?
Well, no, I mean, it helps Labour because you begin to forget the current crises that they're in at the moment. I think that the best hope for the Conservatives is how weird the general election was. You were talking about the vote for Labour is actually incredibly weak. You're talking about 2/3 of the MPs being elected by just 1/3 of the voters. That means there's a lot to play for in 5 years' time at the next general election. And that's
so it may not be entirely predictable. I'm sorry, we're going to have to stop it there. Benjamin Butterworth and Nigel Nelson, thanks very much for joining us here on Westminster Watch. Thanks again to my guests for joining me, and don't forget to subscribe to the TRT World YouTube channel for more lively debate and conversation. But for now, from me and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.